I've been thinking a lot about this whole freedom of speech debate lately. It's fascinating how we're still struggling with where to draw the line between free expression and hate speech.
Man, that's such a complex issue. Like, on one hand, we want to protect everyone's right to speak their mind, but then you've got people using that freedom to spread hatred and cause real harm to others.
Exactly. And what's wild is how different countries handle it. Take Germany, for example. They've got these super strict hate speech laws because of their history with Nazi propaganda. But here in the US, we're all about that First Amendment life.
It's crazy when you think about it. The internet has made this whole thing way more complicated too. Like, now anyone can blast their opinions to millions of people instantly, whether they're spreading love or hate.
Yeah, and that anonymity online just adds fuel to the fire. People say things behind a keyboard that they'd never say to someone's face. But here's what I find really interesting. Some argue that we should let all speech flow freely, even the hateful stuff, because sunlight is the best disinfectant.
That's a pretty powerful metaphor, the idea that exposing these harmful ideas to public scrutiny will somehow neutralize them. But does that actually work in practice?
I've seen it go both ways. Sometimes public debate does shut down harmful ideas, but other times it just gives them a bigger platform. Look at social media. It can amplify the worst voices and make fringe opinions seem mainstream.
You're hitting on something important there. It's like we're trying to balance this perfect ideal of free speech with the real-world consequences of letting harmful ideologies spread unchecked. The historical examples are pretty sobering.
Absolutely. And you know what's really interesting? The whole concept of freedom of speech being this absolute unlimited right might be more of an illusion than we want to admit. Even in the most free societies, there are always some constraints.
Right? Like, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. There's that famous example. So we already accept some limitations. The question is just, where do we draw that line?
Exactly. And every society draws that line differently based on their values and experiences. Even platforms like Twitter and Facebook are constantly adjusting their policies on what constitutes acceptable speech.
It's wild how something that seems so straightforward, like everyone should be able to express themselves freely, gets so complicated when you really dig into it. The digital age has just thrown gasoline on that fire.
For sure. And we can't ignore the real harm that hate speech causes. It's not just about hurt feelings. We're talking about actual violence that can result from normalized hatred, communities being torn apart, psychological trauma.
That's what makes this such a tough nut to crack. We want to protect free expression, but we also need to protect vulnerable people from genuine harm. There's no easy answer.
No, and maybe that's the point. Maybe we need to stop looking for an easy answer and accept that this is something societies will always need to negotiate and adjust as times change.
Man, this conversation has got me thinking about how social media platforms should handle this. They're basically becoming the new town squares, but they're run by private companies.
And that's a whole other layer to this debate. Should private companies be the ones making these decisions about what speech is acceptable? It's like we're privatizing our public discourse.
Wild times we're living in, man. Wild times. This stuff